Welcome back to Drama Means Podcast. This is our Season 2, Episode 1, and we're finally back. Sorry we said we were going to go back, mid-January, but I have been so sick for the last month and a half, and I'm finally back and I have a voice again. I can talk. Today we're going to be talking about the 2023 K-drama Twinkling Watermelon.
So let's jump into a little summary. Being the only member of his family that isn't deaf, Yoon-gil has always been the family's ears to the outside world. But after a horrible fight with his father over his ambition to pursue music, Yoon-gil finds himself in a mysterious music shop that transports him back to the 1990s. Before he can even wrap his head around the incredible turn of events, he comes face to face with his high school-aged father. To his astonishment, his father isn't the model student he would have thought. Even stranger, his father isn't deaf, a condition he always thought his dad was born with. This revelation forces him to re-examine everything he knows about his family, his history, and the type of person he wants to be in the future.
So last year in our 2023 Drama Means Podcast Awards, we voted Twinkling Watermelon to be the best drama of the year. So we're going to go ahead and go into detail about what we really enjoyed about the drama. And for me, first and foremost is the cast, the acting. They were so great. We're just going to go ahead and talk about that.
I think the cast was really well. I don't know if it's actually the cast is the strongest part of this, because I think the whole thing is very strong. I think they were given really good material to work with. I think the story's very organic. The emotions are organic. Nothing feels put on or forced. And I think the actors elevated the material even further. So it's when something just feels this complete, it feels like it's really running on all cylinders to me. Like, I thought the cast was fantastic, but then I also thought the premise was clever, and I thought the subject matter was interesting, and I thought that the way it was structured, like in paced, it was really good and subtle, and they didn't over-exert the subtext. Like, they made you think a little bit about it, and they made you exist in these moments with the characters that a lot of shows kind of force-feed you. So, I would agree the cast was a highlight, but to me, like, this is one of the most complete dramas of 2023, so it's probably why it was my favorite.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I was actually thinking earlier about how, what faults the drama has, and it's so minuscule that I can barely think of anything, and I just enjoyed it so much throughout, and we pretty much binged the drama when we were watching it, and it was just so enjoyable. And I personally have only seen Solina act before in previous projects. I haven't seen the rest of the cast in terms of the younger actors. So it was really like a pleasant surprise for me, and now I feel like I've discovered, these new actors that I'm like looking forward to their next projects. And, I'm sure everyone else already knew who they were and, already fans of theirs. But for me, Twinkling Watermelon really opened my eyes to, a new set of actors, for me to follow.
Can I also just clear up something? Because I have a bad rap of only liking shows that have action in them and things have to explode for stupid Ryan to like it. He needs explosions and actions. But yet, I called this my most favorite drama of 2023, and it's mostly emotionaling.
I mean, it's emotion-based, yes, but there are, other things happening. If it was just relationship and just, romance, you would be so over it.
Well, I think that's the thing I'm discovering about myself, is that I don't actually like to watch people... I don't like to watch relationships between people who are falling in love. I like to watch relationships between, parents, father and son, parent-child, or bromances, or teamwork. I like those type of relationships, seeing a bonds form. I don't necessarily like the romance, and I think that's maybe why this one works so well, because the emotions are mostly father-son. It's not exactly a romance. I don't know, would you call this one a romance?
I mean, there is romance in it. So that's why I feel like it's so well rounded, because it hits on relationships between everybody. So there are like the father son, there's even the mother son, and then there is romance, and then there is friendship and brotherhood, and it just has, and like mentorship.
Yeah, that's the ones I like. I like the mentorship. I like the coming of age and learning who you are as a person, and like, that the gross romance stuff. Ew. Girls are icky.
Which is really difficult for me because I love the romance stuff. I mean, I also like things, like I like mystery, I like thrillers, I love like a good whodunit, but I love the romance, and I will watch stuff just romance based, and it's really hard to get Ryan to watch those with me, and it's hard to do this podcast without having some of those in it. So we can't watch explosions every single time.
But that being said, the fact that this one is still our favorite collectively, like and independently, like you thought this was the best one of last year, I thought it was the best one of last year, and the fact that it's not really my type of show, and the fact that I still think it's the best drama, like, goes to show how strong it really was. Like, my problem with most romance is that you kind of know the couple is going to be together. You kind of just know the ending, and now you're seeing how it happens, and it just, I'm like, yeah, and I get it. I'm oversimplifying it, but I had no idea how these relationships were all going to play out.
Yeah, but sometimes you can just enjoy a journey. Like, you don't have to not know the outcome.
Of course. But what I'm saying is that I find it very difficult for a great romance to be crafted, because they seem to get a little lazy, in my opinion. Like, they really rely on tropes, and it's like, how many like almost kisses can you do in a show before I'm going to roll my eyes? How many, I overheard him saying he liked this other girl, and now I don't like him because he said it completely out of context because I happened to walk in the room. And it's just, those things drive me so nuts, and a lot of romance shows use them. So it's just, I'm like, ugh, I don't want to watch that. And when they're done well, when the writing's done well, I'll watch anything.
Okay, so how do you feel about the romance within this drama? Like, let it be between Eun-gil and Se-kyung, or actually Eun-yu, or between Chong-ah and Yi-chan. Like, how did you like the romance in this drama?
So for me, it's structured different than a normal romance, right? Because we know his father, Eun-gil's father, married his mother. We know the mother's deaf. We know that he meets his dad, and there's this deaf woman. It's like, okay, that's his mom. I got to get these two together, but he's interested in someone else, right? So we kind of know that these two people are supposed to be together. It's a little bit of a Back to the Future, like, oh no, me showing up screwed up my parents' relationship. Or wait, why is my dad not in love with my mom? I need to fix that. So it's not a traditional, here's romantic lead A and here's romantic lead B, and then they slowly fall in love. There's a complexity to the plotting of it. And then the fact that the doppelganger issue where, the woman goes away, the girl goes away, and she comes back, she's got a very different personality, and now that's going to be his love interest, even though the dad is obsessed with her, but it's not really her. Like, there's a lot of things going on in the romance that aren't just, are these people going to be together because they went to band together or whatever. I'm just saying it's more complex.
What do they call you? Romance illiterate?
No, it's not romance illiterate. It's just, I find so many romances convoluted and forced, and a lot of times when we're watching a show, including one we're watching now, but we're going to talk about that much, much later, I sometimes find I don't know why these two people are into each other. And sometimes the explanation of why they're into each other, I'm like, okay, I guess. And that's fine, because sometimes you see couples out there that don't quite make any sense to you, but it makes sense to them, and that's fine. But as an audience, I want to understand why the couples are together. I want to understand why these two people are drawn together. And I'll say that about this one. It does make a lot of sense why these couples are drawn together. And I feel like they do a good job of kind of architecting those relationships so that by the time they get together, you go, yep, those are the couples that are supposed to be together. I think one of my other things with international dramas versus like Western dramas when it comes to romance is that the way that like the ships work and the way that like the male lead and the female lead like are always going to be together, it takes some getting used to for me, because in Western kind of dramas you don't necessarily go into it knowing that, well, that's the female lead and that's the male lead and they're going to end up together. Like there's love triangles, or you don't really sure he's got to pick between these two people, and it's not a clear cut. Like if he's going to pick Jennifer Aniston or, you know, the guest star of the week, like, you know what I mean? It was never just Ross and Rachel at the beginning of Friends was not just predetermined. Like, well, obviously by the end of the show, it became that, right? And I think that's some of my hesitation towards some of these romances is like, it feels like two trains just slowly coming into the station. Like it'll get here eventually. So the journey does have to be very compelling for me to care. And I will say I cared about this one. It wasn't my most favorite part of the drama, the relationships between them. I didn't think that was the strongest part of the drama.
What I do like, I like the natural building or buildup of their relationships. I like that the dad wasn't like into Chonga right from the start. You know, like he ends up liking her.
Yeah, that's the best part of it for me, is that he doesn't know he's supposed to be with, you know what I mean? It almost feels like sometimes the characters are in on it when we're watching a drama like that, where it's like, I don't know, did someone whisper him like, hey, the drama only works if you're with that one? But in this one, she's not even on his radar.
Yeah. And she doesn't end up on his radar until Eun-gil mentions her name, and then he's like, who is that? I've never even met this person. So, and it is kind of interesting that Eun-gil kind of let them meet like 2 years before they were supposed to meet, which was interesting for me.
Yeah, because in their history, they didn't meet until much, much later after he'd had this accident, and he was also deaf now and goes to learn sign language, and then they meet, and now he's meeting her as a hearing person and still falls in love with her. And it really proves it wasn't just two deaf people in a place where he's learning sign language that they fell in love. It was they're supposed to be in love no matter what, which is really strong, and I think it's a really good choice to let him affect the future in that way, to demonstrate to the audience, no, it's not just that deaf people should be together. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not cheap and surface like that. Because at the beginning of the show, it's like the whole family is deaf except for Yoon-gil. So you're just, oh yeah, well, deaf people are married, and then they had a deaf kid, and it's like, oh, this could go really bad from a structural drama place. And it was so well done and so integral to the story. Everyone's, viewpoint on the family and their viewpoint on their position in the family. It was just set up so well, paid off so well.
Yeah. So I do have to say, in the casting of this, the older actor, Choi Won-young, he plays the older Lee-chan character. He plays the dad version, right? And I've seen him as an older version of another character before. And in both, that I can remember. As both characters, he's been the weaker actor of the younger counterpart. And I am a little disappointed that that's the case. So in 2015, there was a drama called Hello Monster that starred So In-guk and Park Bo-gum and Choi Won-young. Choi Won-young plays the older version of a serial killer sociopath, right? And the younger version is played by Dio or Kyung-soo from EXO. And Dio's version of that character is so hauntingly creepy that just him talking, and he's being nice and gentle while he talks to a child, but it is so scary that you get these chills throughout your bones. He's so scary, right? And then fast forward to when that character is older, played by Che Won-young, it just becomes like he's just a normal dude. You don't feel that he's scary at all. Even when so he had like a secret identity where, not unlike Dexter, where he's, like the corner guy.
He's the crime scene investigator or whatever, yeah.
And so you don't know that there's something off about him, really. And he's, so you, like, I understand if he's trying to play nice, but when you find out that that's the same person, he should give you that, like, creepiness, like, any kind of, like, hint of that serial killer sociopath feeling, right? And he totally negates it. And you're just like, oh, he's just some dude. Like, he feels like a dude. He doesn't feel like, he's not scary, he's not a killer, he's, he just plays it straight. And so in this, I mean, he's better in this in terms of, like that very strong scene where, Eun-gil and him are like fighting in sign language. That is such a strong scene, and he does well, but also, like, when you, as a whole in the drama, I feel that the younger actor is just better than he is.
It makes me wonder, and I think maybe a little bit is lost in translation for me because I'm like reading subtitles and trying to pay attention to performance and inflection, and obviously I don't understand the language, but it's always an interesting thing to me when you have two actors playing the same character. And it's something I noticed for the first time when I watched the movie Looper. And you watch it and you realize Joseph Gordon-Levitt is doing a Bruce Willis, basically, impression. But he has modeled his character after Bruce Willis, rather than like Bruce Willis modeling his character after Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And you're like, okay, well, is that because Bruce is more famous or more iconic? Like, which way does it go? And we were recently watching that show, The Old Man, and there's a guy who plays a young Jeff Bridges, and there's a guy who plays a young John Lithgow. And both of them are playing young John Lithgow and young Jeff Bridges. And you're like, yeah, because those two are the more iconic actors. So it's interesting to hear you say that the younger actors are kind of outshining the older actor.
And I think in this case, I don't think they're really thinking of acting as each other. They're just playing it how they would play that character. So, and of course, like, the emphasis is on the younger version of that character. So I would understand that he's not going to try to model himself after the older version of that character. But I feel like there should be some kind of more, like,
connective tissue.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also, he's a very different character as a young man than he is as an older man. I mean, besides the obvious part that when we meet him as a father, he's deaf. And when we meet him as a young man, he can hear, and he was in a band, so he can impress a girl, and he's very, like, irresponsible. He's a very different, immature person. So that totally makes sense. The performance is different.
Mm-hmm.
But I do agree. I think the young actors in this show, I mean, again, we spend more time with the young actors than we do the older generation. But they definitely do really, like, when you think back to scenes, with the exception of, one very specific scene, but with the exception of a few scenes, you really think back to this one about the younger guys and girls.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about a couple of scenes? You want to talk about the big fight scene? Like, I mean, we're kind of talking about casting and acting.
Yes. So these are...
Do you want to click off?
It's up to you. I had this section on, like, favorite scenes. I have it both. So I don't know if you wanted to talk, like, and then we'll just not talk about the favorite scenes in the bottom. We'll just talk about now.
Either way. I don't care. I just saw it here, so I
Yeah. No, I ended up putting it in two spots, so it doesn't...
Well, I think maybe it's better to talk about the story, and also just, like, remember we were talking about that, like, how the fact that they're, like, the deaf family, like, plays as an integral part of the premise. Like, should we talk about that first and then get into the more, like, minutia of it?
Yeah.
Should we?
Let's stop this portion.
I agree. So I want to talk a little bit about the basic premise of the entire thing, right? The fact that our main character is the only hearing person in a family that the rest of everybody is deaf. His brother, his mother, his father. So he has this responsibility to the family to kind of look out for them. And we see it very early in the pilot when they're trying to get ripped off by a landlord or whatever. Like, you know, he can kind of be the smart ass and be rude, but he's also the translator for his family. And how absolutely integral that is to this story. It's not a tacked on element of like, well, what haven't we done yet? We haven't done the coming of age story, you know, through sign language. So let's do that. It's not a gimmick. It's really integral to the story. And it drives me nuts when it does feel like a gimmick. But this was like, it reminded me of kind of Quiet Place. Like, The Quiet Place doesn't happen unless that family uses sign language to communicate. Like, who's going to survive the monsters that can hear you and come to kill you? Oh, a family that can survive being silent will survive. It makes perfect sense, right? It makes it a really brilliant premise. So for this, like, I learned so much. It had never occurred to me that, like, the struggles of, you know, obviously just being deaf, the struggles of that, but also the struggles of someone in the family who isn't, who's kind of, I hate to say odd one out, but he felt like an outsider in his own family a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, and he bore such burdens on his shoulder of, you know, his whole family's well-being is on his shoulders. He had to make he had to make the right choice every single time. And one little slip up can like ruin their whole family and lives. That's a big burden on a 10-year-old's shoulders.
Yeah, never being able to be a selfish child when you're a child. I mean, I remember even my own, you know, having to come home and babysit my brothers and not being able to go, and like how like selfish you are for wanting to go play with your friends instead of going home to babysit your younger siblings. Well, this is that times what, 10. You know, he's the voice of the entire family. And also keeping that burden to himself and never sharing it to his dad, and like realizing his dad knows. It's like his dad knows like how important he is. Maybe he doesn't realize how much pressure he's piling on a 10 or 12-year-old, but he kind of understands like, no, we know that this is hard for you too, but it's the hand of cards we've been dealt, and everyone's just trying to do their best. It makes it very tragic, but also beautiful at the same time. I think that's why this works on so many levels, is that you can picture this family in the real world. You can picture the challenges they have and how hard it is just for the average people out there to like survive and make a living and get a job and do all the things and be good human beings. And then you add more challenges on top of that. I think it really speaks to struggles that everyone has. And it doesn't have to be, you know, the quote unquote drama for deaf people. It's ultra relatable. It's relatable to all of us to go, you know what? Yeah, sometimes life sucks. I mean, like I just referenced, like it made me think of my own childhood and the things that, oh man, yeah, I really couldn't be selfish in that sort of way in those times. Could I be a kid? Of course. Like, there's no traumaticness attached to that. Like, oh, poor me. But like, you do start to kind of reflect. And I think that's the key to this, like finding ways to make personal stories universal and making those emotions hit everyone. And I think that's what people get a little sick of, is when it feels like you're being spoon-fed. Here, feel sorry for this person. Here, feel sorry for that. It's like, well, no, but like bring it back. Like, how does it bring us all together? How does it make us all feel something? And they did such a great job with that.
Yeah, I feel like in this drama, the emotional growth was so strong. And I tend to do, as you said before, I tend to really like those connections with like parent son, you know, and the emotional growth and like the understanding. I am someone that like has a really hard time understanding my own parent, you know, and a lot of like arguments happen. Kind of nice to be able to see, you know, like we can find the other person's perspective, and they did it so well without like kind of jamming it in your throat.
Yeah, I find that time travel premise is one of the best ways to kind of walk in someone else's shoes, because, you know, it's an extraordinary circumstance, time travel, right? And there's all the stuff that goes along and the problems that go along, the paradoxes and yada yada. But at its core, a time travel story like this is really about gaining a new perspective. So you're not only gaining a new perspective, like comedically, because you've gone back to the 90s and the internet isn't really a thing. And, they're still selling CDs and MP3s are new, or, all those things that are kind of jokey, you're fish out of water. But it's also just the emotions of being able to see his dad as a completely different person that he's always known him as, and learning things about his parents. And even realizing, I don't really ask that many questions about my parents. I don't really sit down and go, Dad, tell me about how this was. Because again, he was a selfish kid. Like, he wants to be a kid, and the family burden has kind of overwhelmed him a little bit. And so, you don't think to ask those things about your parents when you're 10.
So I taught summer school at one point, and I was talking to my students, and I asked them, they're like, oh, we're going back to Korea for the holidays, and it's going to be so fun. We've never seen snow before. And I was like, oh, great. And I asked them questions of oh, why did your parents move to LA? And, just some kind of family history time, kind of just chit chat. And they had no idea why their parents decided to move. It's just kind of this, when you're young, you don't think to ask questions, ask your parents why they made the decisions that they made, and listen to the stories that their parents have to talk about. And I just remember sitting down and listening to my mom talk about our family history and stories about my grandparents, which I've never met before, and just stuff like that. And it's just I love listening to those stories. I'm a story junkie, but then I learned so much more about my own family history, and then that gets passed down, and the hardships that my parents had to go through. I understand that as a child you don't ask those questions, but I definitely recommend just sitting down and talking to your parents or your grandparents. Just listen to some family stories of what happened, things that they've gone through, how your parents met, things like that.
Well, I think that that's why this is so universal, is that he goes back into the past and immediately is learning so many things, and they do a really good job of helping him reflect on how little he knows about his own family. And this story becomes that kind of journey of not only self-identity, but identity about those around him, and the assumptions that he made. He'd always assumed that his dad was born deaf. He never thought to ask if he was born deaf. His dad never talked about it because, stoic father who is not open emotional either. It just demonstrates really well the gap that the generations need to bridge to be able to have these conversations. It's much easier for the two men to talk as contemporaries when they're the same age and they're school buds. But when they're father and son and there's this generation gap, it's a lot harder to start that conversation. I had similar conversations with my grandmother. We took a road trip, and I was like, what did you do for fun when you were a kid? And my family was very, very poor. And the answer was, we had a ball and a stick. We threw a ball back and forth sometimes, me and my sister.
Did she really say that?
Yeah. I was like, what did you do for fun on the old farm? She's like, well, we had a ball. We'd throw that around once in a while. And I was like, this is not that long ago. This is a woman who's alive while I'm alive. And her entertainment, think about what we have: TVs and phones and iPads and internets and constant entertainment. I said internets on purpose. I'm trying to sound like an old man.
I understand that.
But the fact that it's 2 generations ago, my entertainment as a kid was throwing a ball. That was about it. That's what we had. We had a ball.
So there were a lot of questions we had during a specific moment in the drama where Sekyung comes back from abroad, and her personality is so different. And now that we know it's not even the same person. But at the time, we had all these questions. And it was subtle enough where they weren't shoving it in your face. And the actress, Solina, she did such a good job where it wasn't so over the top that she was immediately oh, that's not the same person. but it was so prominent that you're like, this is so weird. Like, why is her personality completely different after going abroad? Like, and I'm like, part of me is like trying so hard to like make it work, and I'm like, well, it's because of this, and you're like, no, this is really weird. And then they answer our questions, and they, and everything gets paid off. So if they introduce something, it gets paid off, and it just feels so nice when there's like not any like weird open endings.
I think that's so rare too, because you find so many dramas, movies, whatever, that kind of raise a question and then either never answer it or just kind of give you a half answer. You almost think they made a mistake by answering it. And so when she comes back and her personality is so different, I'm like, oh man, this is either about to be the worst thing we've ever watched, because this is just going to be so uneven and off the rails. And my first thought when she comes back and her personality is just completely different is that, like good kid who's at a mental break, who it's like the good girl who just can't be the good girl anymore. I'm so sick of getting straight A's. I just want to screw up bad enough that I can get in trouble. And I was like, oh, is that where they're going with her character? Like, is she just going to be like nuts because she's just so sick of being the like perfect model image of her mother? Which is kind of true, because that's who her mother is and who her mother wants her to be. And she is rebelling, but there was a twist on top of that. And I'm like, wait, I kept on like, what is the deal with this? This has to amount to something, or I'm just done with the show. Because if it doesn't amount to something, I don't want to watch this anymore.
Yeah, and I also was going down that route. I'm like, well, of course, like she doesn't have like any kind of supervision anymore. Of course she's gonna rebel. Like that was my justification, and I was so like adamant about like loving the show already from like what we had seen before, and so I'm like, okay, this is it has to work, and I'm like pushing it to work. And then when you realize that, oh, she's not really even the same person, you're like, oh, we've both felt so relieved that like, oh, they definitely had like a purpose.
Yeah, it felt crafted and not by accident. Like everything I think is very purposeful in the show, that they're using every piece of the animal, as we would say. Like they're not letting anything go to waste. The other thing I liked about this drama a lot was that they let the subtext be subtext. And what I mean by that is that sometimes the emotions and the meanings of things that are said is hidden in a layer of something else. And I personally find it very annoying that a lot of audiences don't understand someone saying I love you unless they say the words I love you. And so an example of like subtext would be, a character knows that every Friday this other character brings this to work. And then they notice on that Friday that they didn't bring it. And so they go out and they get it and they bring it for that person, and it's a very touching thing they did for them. And you can tell that that person loves the other person by the act they've done, or, just here's your coffee is them saying I love you. They don't actually have to say I love you every time they're thinking it, right? And in this show, they let those moments kind of sit and let the audience go, oh, yeah, that's what they're thinking. Their actions and their words don't have to be so on the nose. And I think we read a review earlier that was just very upset at the show for, lengthening the, what was it?
It was the pacing of the show, and that it took all the way to episode 11 before, or at least Ichhan still at episode 11 was still hung up on Sekyung instead of Chonga, and they're like the main parts of Eungil's life, and so their relationship needs to be more prominent, and that and the whole purpose is that Eungil was supposed to prevent Ichhan from becoming deaf and preventing this accident that happens. And that by then it was so obvious that Eungil was not going to be able to prevent the accident, and that Ichan was going to be deaf, and that was the whole purpose. His like goal was to prevent Ichan from being deaf and changing, the future kind of thing.
Which is very clear that you missed the point of the whole drama. If you left the drama thinking that, well, the goal and the point of the whole thing was him to prevent this accident, you've missed the point. That is the character's goal. The character starts to believe that his goal is to rescue his father from an affliction called being deaf. But his real goal, the subtext of the entire story, is for him to understand his father and him to understand what he wants as a character. And what he wants isn't necessarily a fixed dad in that sense. He's not ashamed of his father in any way. Like, of course, if you can prevent someone from having an accident that you love, of course you'd want to stop the accident. But I think if you were really watching this show, you knew he was never going to save the dad from being deaf. You knew that that was a fixed point. And we were just waiting for that to happen because him being deaf is who his father is to him. And it would have been teaching us the wrong lesson, I think, if he would have saved the dad. And then the dad, like, it's almost teaching us, like, hey, life's better when you're not deaf. And it's like, well, that's not the lesson of the show. The show is you need to communicate with people in order to understand them. And there's a barrier to be able to communicate when you're deaf. And eliminating that barrier helps a lot, but you can still persevere no matter what. And you can still get to know your father. You can still have a respect for your father and son. Again, you can still bridge that gap between the generations no matter what has happened. So I think it's interesting reading that review of like, oh, I think you missed the point a little bit. Because this isn't, we were talking about time travel in general. This isn't a time travel show. He didn't go back in time on purpose to prevent an event. He was forced to go back in time. And the point is really about character growth and about who are you? What do you want? Are you strong enough to tell your father what you actually want out of life? Because he wasn't before. He was going to sell the guitar.
Yeah, and letting yourself live your life for yourself. And learning to be able to live freely without that type of self-burden.
Well, you can have both, right? You can be responsible and you can live for yourself.
Yes.
And if the people around you really love you, they will understand too. His dad is going to understand that, yes, I know I have responsibility in this family, but I can also do things that I love and follow my passions. And parents and kids aren't always going to understand each other's passions. Like they're, oh, I don't know, music's dead end. And is that really like, parents are going to be parents no matter what. But you still have to live honestly to who you are and have the courage to do that. But it doesn't mean just shirking your responsibilities and saying, well, screw it. I don't like the hand I've been dealt. I'm running away.
So we were talking a little bit about time traveling, and I asked, we're comparing two types of time traveling, a time traveling drama where you go back specifically to change something that happened in the past to prevent that from happening in the future, or this one where you go back and really just like a learning process, but in turn actually changing something in the future. I compared this drama to an old 90s Hong Kong film where the son goes back in time. Like, he just never got along with his dad. His dad was just insufferable to him. And then he goes back in time and he becomes his dad's best friend. And so very similar premise. In the movie, nothing changes the future because he had gone back in time. So at one point he realizes when he returns back in the future that the picture that he had took with his dad, and his dad, treated that guy, which was his son, was his best friend. It just so happened that like when he took the picture he had like turned to sneeze, and so you couldn't really see his face. But like everything that happened to lead to that point, like he was in the past with his dad.
Yeah, it's the Looper thing, right? Where it's basically like the past is the past and the future, present, whatever you want to call it, is the future and the present because the past was the past. And it introduces paradoxes of like, well, yeah, you would have had to, if this would had to have happened for you to go into the past in order to change the past, but because you were in the past, it wasn't really changing the past, it was what already happened, and then all of us have a headache.
Yeah.
But also, you have to go, well, I'm either going to watch a time travel thing and know there are paradoxes and just get over it, or you can be whiny on the internet and complain about it till the cows come home.
But I do like this version. I know I always sometimes like I kind of argue with myself on if I want them to be able to change the future or not. Sometimes depending obviously on the drama, but for this I really do like that, the future had changed, and he did pursue, his passion. So
I don't mind it. I think we were talking about this earlier. Is I don't mind just kind of forgiving the paradoxes and letting him be able to change the future, because the show, this is going to sound corny and cliche, but the show isn't really about time travel. The show's about a family. So, like, I'm not going to sit here and complain about, well, wait a minute. If he'd changed everything, then he would have never gone back in time to change everything. Like, I get it, there are paradoxes, but I don't really care. I felt like they went with the correct ending. I think it would have been a little of a depressing ending for him to just go back and resume the same history with that argument and resolve. They could have totally gone that way, but it would have really given that effect of, it was all just a dream. None of this really happened or really matters, but you learned a valuable lesson, which I think would have made it a little cheap. Mm-hmm. So I did find the end to be a little over the top corny, like a little too, yeah. Everything's just wrapped up with a perfect bow and happily ever after, but I also didn't mind it all that much.
Yeah. I definitely preferred that over like something like super dramatic.
Yeah, it didn't need another layer of tragedy or complexity. It's just sort of like, all right, he did what he needed to do, he learned who he needed to be, let him go back home and now kind of like almost symbolically live the better life now that you know who you are and who you're supposed to be. Like, it was almost just a way for them to demonstrate to us, he learned the lesson and life's going to be better now. And it was physically and, visually better.
Yeah. I did like the little wink at the end where his dad realizes that his best friend was his son, and his son had traveled back in time. Like that was kind of nice.
That's a little Easter egg cute wink to the audience.
Yeah.
I don't mind that stuff. I only care about that when time travel is leaned on so heavy in a plot of a movie or a show where we have to travel back to this exact moment in order to stop this thing. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. And then you start like kind of pulling apart time travel. I think that I'm more hard on it then, rather than with an emotional story that's, coming of age and he learns a lesson, and I'll let all the time travel stuff slide.
Yeah. I'm not sure if anyone noticed this. I'm sure everyone noticed it, actually. That they, for his mentor, they changed the two actors. And I understand maybe why they did it, but I didn't really like it. Because first of all, it was a little confusing at the beginning where I'm like, who is this guy? He's not playing that same character, is he? Like, but why didn't they just use that same actor for that character? And I was like, is it because of scheduling issues? Was there a scandal for that actor? Like, I had to...
You went way too deep dive. I was like, no, they're just basically saying he's younger, so he's a different actor. And it was very inconvenient for them to recognize him, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it was necessary. I guess that part of this whole thing, to me, was the weakest part of the show, is the idea that the music shop guy, the magic music shop, and his mentor in the future, present, and the past are all kind of the same, like, magic elf. Like, I didn't need that, I guess. I didn't need the explanation of, well, the mentor is also the magic music shop owner who sends them back, but then he's also his mentor in, like, the past, and they all know him. It just, I kind of was just like okay with it just being magic, I guess.
Yeah. But I also like, is that character really necessary? I don't know. Like, to me, like, they felt like they needed some kind of explanation of how they can get, you know, back to the past, you know?
Yeah. I would have, yeah, it's one of those things where I just don't care enough about how they got back to the past. I think just having it be like, all right, so his mentor that taught him guitar and taught him his love for music and basically told him it's okay to be you is also the grandfather of the other character.
Unyu.
Yeah, so it's her grandfather and it's his mentor, and the mentor dies, and they kind of have a near miss. Like the kid is moving as the funeral is happening, and they literally like roll by each other, and they have a near miss. And then fate steps in and goes, no, 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 these two people are supposed to meet. And fate ensures that they meet through this very convoluted time travel story.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
I just wish Faith didn't have a face.
That's what I mean. I think it's just Faith. He is a weird guy in a music shop that you know, he's the guy in the crossroads, the deal with the devil, whatever you want to say. He's just a comic relief character in a shop that's representing fate. I don't need it to be so clean, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of don't even need that guy.
But like, they just poof. They just go back
Yeah, they just walk through a door and they're there. Like, why do we have to?
Yeah, that's fair.
There's plenty of other dramas that's like, you know.
I think the reason he's there, and it's not just walk through the door, poof, and you could do this in a different way, but what they were trying to do with the character is he willingly gives up his guitar. He willingly puts down his passion. And the guy's like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, I'm sure. And he's like, okay, here's the money. And then sends him back to be like, are you really sure though? Because you're not. Because you're walking away from who you are. And he does the same thing to the girl with her cello. Mm-hmm. So like, you needed to dramatize that moment. And there's a number of ways they could have dramatized it. They didn't need a character. They didn't need a magic store. But I think they needed something there to really signify you are about to make the biggest mistake of your life, and I'm going to show you why you shouldn't do that. And I don't mind the character being, you know, there. But him also being the mentor and kind of guiding them both together. Like, I get why they did it. I don't need it. I don't really care. And then it added this layer of having to cast 2 different people to play the mentors in the past.
3.
Well, 3 different people, because the magic guy too. And that just becomes a little unwieldy, and it feels like a mistake that they're like, wait, they cast a younger version? They could just put a brown wig on the original guy.
But like makeup,
Yeah.
or like, you know, they do it in Chinese dramas all the time where they like, you know.
No, they were stuck because of the reveal at the end.
Yeah.
They couldn't have those people be the same people the entire show because of the reveal when she says, I know it's you, Grandpa, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I think that's the one instance in this show where the writers were protecting themselves with their writing rather than putting the show, what was best for the show, forward.
Yeah.
And they had this cute idea for a reveal, and that kind of what we call the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah.
So, like, if I would say there's anything that this drama kind of did wrong, and again, it's nitpicky because it's such a small part of the show.
Yeah.
And does it ruin the show? Not really. It's just, that's a scene I could have cut.
Yeah. So I will have to say that I really like the actor that plays the master, not necessarily the mentor, because I really like him. He's actually a stage actor / musical actor.
Wait, which one is he? Is he the one in the present or the past?
He's the magic shop, or the music shop owner.
Oh, the guy who's in the magic music shop. The youngest guy of the 3.
Yeah. So I love him because he's so good, and part of me was just like sitting there. I'm like, oh, I wish he just breaks into song. Like, not really for the drama because that would be weird, but I wanted him to break into song because he's a musical actor, and I just want him to, like, you know, sing.
I thought if they were going to use that character, I wish they would have gone weirder. Like, I wish they would have gone weirder with it rather than him like being on the phone all the time. And maybe it was actor availability and you just need him in that set and that's it, and he can work for 2 days and you get 10 episodes out of him. But I kept thinking, did you watch the show Legion with me? The FX show? It's a Marvel show. It's very like out of body and into the mind. And at one point they just like go into like space in this space capsule, and there's this weird guy dressed in disco, and he just looks right at the camera and he's like, "Oh, hello." And you're like, "What am I watching?" But it's kind of like that. Like that character can break into song whenever he wants, and it's just it's a little bizarre. And since we're already dealing with magic, we're already dealing with time travel in this magic music shop, I do feel like they could have gone a lot weirder with it.
Yeah.
And it did feel like that actor had the chops. Like he was chewing everything he was given.
Yeah.
And it felt like, man, they could have gone a lot bigger.
Yeah. So yeah, next time make sure he breaks into song. is my suggestion.
It reminds me like if you would hire an actor that has a strength, just use the shit out of that strength. Like, exploit the hell out of strength for your show, even if it's a little weird.
Yeah. Anyway, back on track. So we had actually talked a little bit about our 2 favorite scenes of the drama in our awards episode last year. And so we want to kind of reiterate, our 2 favorite scenes. So my favorite scene, well, they're both my favorite scene, but...
No, you have to pick one. I'm kidding. Go ahead. You can't have 2 favorite scenes.
Why? I love them both. They're just 2 different. One is so strong and so emotionally driven, and just like it makes you cry, it makes you like kind of shudder inside, and it's intense, and you're just so drawn into that moment, which is the fight between Eungil and Ichan, the older Ichan, and they're fighting in sign language, and it's just as effective in sign language, and even more effective because they're not just screaming at each other, and all those emotions are in the face and in the eyes, and it's just so good. And like, I would love to watch, well, I wouldn't love it to watch it over and over again because I would just be crying my eyes out, but I would love to watch it over and over again because it's just so good and it's so powerful, and the acting is just so good in it.
Now, both of those actors, I'm just trying to think of like how difficult it is to rehearse and shoot a massively emotional scene, and shooting it like in sign language. Like, there's so many challenges to that scene for the actors to keep those emotions raw, do sign language correctly. I'm hoping they're doing it correctly. I don't know sign language, so maybe they're just making it up. I hope not. I doubt it. I doubt it very high. But it's just such a challenging thing, and great actors like relish that kind of challenge. Like, I can imagine you getting the scripts and seeing that scene going, "Oh yeah, I'm up for this," like really digging in and sinking your teeth in, and like the chemistry and the staging and the lighting and it's everything just really came together, really effective. And it's interesting because there's so many different ways to convey emotions, and I get so upset when people talk about, well, the only way to convey this emotion is by screaming. Well, the only way to convey this emotion is by punching. You're like, no, you can convey this emotion with a look. You can convey this emotion with a gesture, with staging, with sign language, with spoken. There's so many ways that you can convey these things with that I think is really limiting, good storytellers. Oh, well, I mean, the way you have to convey anger is that someone's yelling. No, incorrect. I do not believe that even a little bit.
Our second favorite scene is the cutest scene ever, which is Eungil and Ichan trying to cuddle with Grandma. That is like so adorable and so poignant, and just, again, very emotional for the 2 guys, but it's just like, but it's cute. And like the grandma is like, well, I don't know because I've never met my grandparents, but but it's like, oh, get off me, like, kind of thing. But it's just so cute, and they're like, no, we're gonna sleep with you tonight.
Yeah, it's like wholesome, and really like, he'd never, the younger Ingolf had never met, but he passed his parents, you know, like,
well, he was like a baby.
Yeah, no, but like a baby. Like, he didn't really even really remember her.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a toddler, right? Because the brother had been born.
Yeah.
And the grandma was like, oh, you can help your younger brother, yada, yada. But, like, he just never knew her as a person.
Yeah.
Like, it was a very faint figment of his kind of, you know, not imagination, but memory.
Adolescent.
Yeah. He never got to have a relationship with that person. So now he not only gets to have a relationship with his dad, he gets to have a relationship with this woman also. And that just kind of, like, taking the moment, like seizing the moment to give your grandma a hug that you never were able to do.
Yeah.
And the fact that it turned into a beat for comedy and not sappy.
Yeah.
That's what I appreciate about it the most. Is that they played this really, like, beat that could have been over the top and crying. Like, there's a million ways to play this sort of, like, I got to hug my grandma beat. They played it for comedy, and I think it was such a great choice.
This drama is really well balanced between comedy and, you know, drama, that it's just, you know, there's a lot of shows, dramas that, like, they just can't find that middle ground, that balance of when it's the right time to be comedic and when there's the right time to be super emotional. And I'm sure we'll talk about this some point where, like, my journey to you is, like, so ridiculously off balance in terms of comedy and, like, the serious drama part, that it just was so jarring for us. But in Twinkling Watermelon, it was so done so well.
I mean, I think a lot of ways shows do comedies, you have the comedy character because all of the other characters are too busy being serious, so then you have to bring in the comedy character to do the comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Or the characters turn into a different character when they're doing the comedy, so then it's off balance. And in this, they were able to keep the characters consistent so that the same character who's doing the drama can also do the comedy. And it doesn't feel out of place because it's all within the umbrella of who this character is. And they nailed the tone when it came to that. They really nailed, like, they never lost sight of the show they were making. It never turned in, well, now it's a slapstick comedy, and then characters are suddenly acting nothing like they're supposed to act. And then they're right back to crying. And so it's hard to do. It's hard to pull off because you see it more often than not, how shows do comedies is like, and it's the overweight assistant character is a bumbling idiot, and that's the comedy. Here comes the comedy. And this one didn't have to rely on that because they could figure out a way to integrate it at the right time when you needed a laugh.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, I loved this drama so much, and the flaws in it for me was so small that for me, it's Around the World in 80 Days.
Which is 10 out of 10?
Yes, 10 out of 10. So I very much enjoyed it. It's, like, so close to perfect for me that I can't possibly, like, knock off any points. So yeah, Around the World in 80 Days.
Well, I also don't think there's such a thing as a perfect show. That's why it's very hard for me to rate anything 10 out of 10. Because I don't think perfection is actually achievable. There's always, my favorite movies, there's always, like, something where you're like, well, that was kind of dumb. Or that was kind of silly. But I also rate this Around the World in 80 Days. I think it's... Me giving 10 out of 10 is going to be very rare on this podcast. Because I have to enjoy something so thoroughly from beginning to end that any mistakes they made can't ruin it. And as we see over and over again, endings are really hard. There's so many dramas that 75% of it, they're just knocking it out of the park. And then you get to the last 5 episodes and it just falls off a cliff. And I can still appreciate the first 3/4 of the show. It's just not 10 out of 10. It's not close enough to be perfect. But this one, I think, my gripes are so small. Maybe my biggest gripe is the title. I don't love the title.
Twinkling Watermelon?
Yeah.
It's, like, part of their band name.
I know, but it's part of their band name because it's the title. Like, they could have named it Twinkling
Turkey.
Porcupine. And that's what this... Like, I don't... There's no reason it has to be watermelon over anything else. I mean, maybe... I don't know. It's just...
I actually love it because it's so, like, offbeat. that, like, I'm going to always remember it. So when I first mentioned watching this particular drama to Ryan, I was like, that's what we're going to watch, Twinkling Watermelon. And I just love the name, so much. And he was like, what? Ugh, whatever.
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't have never picked this up off the shelf. Picture yourself in Blockbuster Video. Take yourself back to the 1990s where the show exists and you are in a Blockbuster Video, kids. It is a wonderful world that has VHS tapes and then DVDs later in history on the wall for you to pick a movie to watch on Friday night, and you pick up a case and it says Twinkling Watermelon with a bunch of goofballs looking at you with big smiles. I don't take that movie home. I don't pick it up off the shelf. I don't watch it. But I would want to watch it.
You and I are so different, because if I saw that on the wall, I would be like, oh my god, I'm so watching Twinkling Watermelon. Because it's freaking called Twinkling Watermelon. It's gonna be great.
No, it could not be great. It could also be not great.
It also, like, the cover kind of reminds me of The Sandlot.
Yes, it's a very Sandlot-y thumbnail that was on the site.
Yeah.
Yes, but if I was thumbing through the site online and I came across Twinkling Watermelon, I would never put that on my watch list unless I really looked at it and saw what it was about. I would have to do a really deep dive. And again, it's not a criticism. The thing's freaking great. It's an amazing show. I'm nitpicking the name. I'm trying to find something to say. But it was fantastic, and I'm glad that the name did not dissuade us from watching.
It would never dissuade me. I seek that out.
Well, I could have boycotted it. I refused to watch this show on the principle that I don't watch sparkly fruit shows.
Okay. Anyway, back on track again. So I mentioned it earlier. This drama reminds me of an old 90s Hong Kong film. So that is going to be my recommendation. It is 90s Hong Kong movie starring two Tony Leungs, Tony Leung Chiu-wei and Tony Leung Ka-fei. And Leung Ka-fei plays the dad and Leung Chiu-wei plays the son. And the movie name is called He Ain't Heavy, He's My Father.
That is also a crazy title. I would also leave that one on the shelf at Blockbuster Video in the 90s. In the Hong Kong international section of the Blockbuster, I see He Ain't Heavy, He's My Father. Next, we're watching Die Hard 2 again.
Well, clearly, I like these weird names, apparently. But it is worth a watch. It's probably, I don't know, it's a little dated. It's probably not as good as Twinkling Watermelon. I'm just remembering from my childhood, this movie. So I haven't watched it in so many years. But I do recommend it. I remember liking it when I watched it. So.
I will watch anything with the Tony Leungs in it.
They are amazing. They're such good actors. And this is also part comedy. And it's actually kind of, back in the day, Tony Leung Chiu-wei used to do a lot of comedy. People don't remember that because he's always been so dramatic and, within the Mood for Love and his Cannes award-winning roles and stuff, that you kind of forget that he can do comedy as well.
Well, I think on the international stage, especially because he's probably best known for his Wong Kar-wai films, right?
Yeah.
All of those, and those are not big comedy. They're very dramatic roles. And obviously, if you've, newer or younger, you know him from Shang-Chi, being the dad. So I think a lot of people, especially internationally, don't see him as a comedic actor.
Yeah.
But the guy has all the range in the world. He's like a once-in-a-generation talent, I think. I don't think I'm overstating that.
You're not.
He's fantastic to watch. I'd watch that guy just peel a banana.
That might be a little boring.
No, he'd find a way to make it interesting.
True, he would, wouldn't he?
He'd peel it from the butt.
Okay, we're getting dumb now. Okay, we're gonna end this show, or this episode. Yeah, so we will see you next week. Please join us. I have no idea what we're gonna talk about next week, but join us to find out.
Thank you so much for listening.